Greetings, everyone. Greetings, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. Thank you all for coming. I hope you've enjoyed your lunch. And I want to thank and pay tribute to the people who made today's event possible. First, let's thank Ralph Watson, who Ralph researched historic recipes and prepared today's delicious lunch. Thanks to members of the church staff, Catherine Schofield, Kate Ninchu, Amelia Gerard, Jamie Garudi, and William Way. Big thanks to members of the Plan Giving Committee, Rebecca Bowen, Bev Hanna, who did the table decorations, Mary Kohak, and Larry Minot. Thanks also to Larry Bowers, Tom Grant, Pam Roberts, Phil Stern, and Don Wells for their contribution to the program you're about to see. And very special thanks to Old South historian Kate Silfen, whose knowledge of earlier times and personalities has been invaluable in preparing the program you're about to see. Today's event is brought to you by the Mary Norton Society. You might ask, who was Mary Norton, and what's her society all about? She was the person who gave our forebears land in 1669, on which our first meeting house was built. We'll hear a little more about Mary in a minute. Her act of generosity created our church, and successive generations have followed Mary Norton's example. Any person who provides for Old South in their estate or retirement plan with a gift, large or small, becomes a member of the Mary Norton Society. Their gift becomes part of the church's endowment and will support the church in perpetuity. Today, there are more than 120 members, and I invite everyone here who's a member of the Mary Norton Society to please stand to be acknowledged. And now, through the wonders of modern technology, I'd like to introduce and welcome Mary Norton herself, who has a few words to say.
Greetings. I am Mary Norton, and I am dazzled to be talking to you across the centuries. Know ye that I bequeathed some land which my departed husband, the Right Reverend John Norton, had willed to me, on which this congregation then built the Cedar Meeting House. Over the centuries, my good husband and I have felt honored as we have watched so many members of this community follow our example by generously remembering this church in your end-of-life plans. I encourage you to continue this tradition. Today, I am joined by diverse good brethren of our beloved church, the Reverends Thatcher and Willard, with whom my good husband and I were well acquainted in our lifetimes, as well as the Reverends Manning, Gordon, and Stafford. All have come to welcome your new senior minister, John Edgerton, and to give him a bit of friendly advice.
Greetings, Reverend Edgerton. I'm Thomas Thatcher, the first minister called to this congregation in 1669. I served through a tumultuous time, just short of 40 years after the founding of our great city. The Native Americans did seek to reclaim the land we had taken from them, and the smallpox did regularly decimate our small population, causing much suffering. I am joined by our second senior pastor, Samuel Willard, our 15th, 16th, and 17th senior pastors, the Reverends Jacob Manning, George Gordon, and Russell Henry Stafford. Reverend Edgerton, Thy arrival as the church's 21st senior minister has called us from heaven. We're here to welcome thee, share our stories, and offer thee some lighthearted advice. The other senior pastors who reside in heaven send you their warm regards, but cannot be here because they're all in heavenly committee meetings. Who would have thought that heaven is run like a congregational church? You modern men do perceive our Puritan orthodoxy as rigid. However, I and other members of the dissenting brethren broke from the first church in 1669, desiring to allow the waters of baptism to flow more freely than had been the practice. We founded Third Church, which has become Old South Church, and by God's will grew this congregation from 28 to 217 members during my 9-year tenure. Now, I want to take the liberty of offering you some advice. The devil awaits idle hands, young man. Do not be idle. When I was ministering to this congregation, I also read in 6 languages, was a practicing physician, and published this young nation's first medical tract on smallpox. To keep the devil from having his way with me, I kept my hands busy making and repairing clocks. You will want to keep busy, Pastor Edgerton.
Greetings, Reverend Edgerton. I was the second pastor called to lead this venerable church. I served from 1678 to 1707. Reverend Thatcher and I had the pleasure of serving as colleagues for the final year of his life. Now, I feel a kinship with you as a pastor who risked the law in favor of his principles. In my time as senior pastor, I urged mercy upon those accused of witchcraft. I had led our congregation in prayer and fasting for the accusers, and when our brother, the good Captain John Alden, was jailed for witchcraft, I helped to break him out. In terms of my contributions, I baptized the infant Benjamin Franklin. He was but a squalling babe at that time, but what a rabble-rouser he became. I also believe that more freely bestowing the waters of baptism should rightly lead to eliminating the requirement for new members to read a written testimony of their faith as a condition of membership. My brothers and sisters in heaven tell me that paved the way for yet a more liberal direction to our beloved congregation. If you're looking for, I know you're well read, but if you're looking for something else to read, I left behind a substantial and influential body of writing that would later be published as entitled a complete body of divinity. What else need I say? Oh yes, and I did this while fathering 20 children. All right. And I also have a word of advice for you, young man. Don't be afraid to have a little fun with the congregation. You won't believe it. Once, I switched pulpits with my brother-in-law. Yes, the whole congregation complained about how dull his sermon was. Sometime later, I delivered the same sermon to the great pleasure and acclaim of the entire congregation. It pleased God to bless me with the ability to appeal to people. I pray that he will also bless you.
Good day. I am the Reverend Jacob Manning. I served Old South Church from 1857 to 1882, and apparently I've grown since then. Another wonderful thing that happened in the intervening period, the razor was invented. Anyway, during those years, our congregation and our nation was torn asunder, driven to division through the Civil War. I opened the Old South Meeting House as a recruiting station, and myself joined the 43rd Regiment of Massachusetts Volunteers as chaplain, desiring to act upon God's call to end the unchristian practice of slavery once and for all, to see the Star-Spangled Banner truly become the symbol of justice and loyalty to human rights that I can only believe the founders intended. Reverend Edgerton, may I call you John? I changed my mind, Reverend Edgerton. You and I have something in common. Like you, I began my tenure here as an associate pastor. I was indeed George Blagden's associate pastor for 15 years, until I assumed the role of senior pastor upon his retirement in 1872. Reverend Blagden and I, we disagreed on many points. I struggled to tolerate his accommodation of slavery and his taste for strong drink. Still, recognizing that our differences reflected the division in our country, our community, and the congregation, we sought common ground so as to hold the congregation together. Now, a bit more about me. As an abolitionist, I have rejoiced from heaven to see the Old South Church become increasingly anti-racist. The congregation recognized our nation's first Black poet by naming the Phyllis Wheatley Room and by creating the columbarium adjacent to the Gordon Chapel, where members of our church who were enslaved are recognized. As minister, Old South's membership grew, and it became clear to some among the congregation that our beloved meeting house on Washington Street could no longer serve to fit our needs. Moving Old South to this beautiful building on Boylston Street was among my proudest contributions to our church. Beat that, Reverend Edgerton. So, I also have some advice for you. I hope that you won't let disagreements with your colleagues or the congregation get you down, but instead, find the path that brings people together in God's name. Now, since I was minister here to today, there's also been new music, some of which I'm fond of, including from a group called The Beatles, spelled wrong. The song is called We Can Work It Out. It would have made a most fitting theme song for Reverend Blagden and I hope it will be inspiring to you and your associate pastors.
A good day to you, Reverend Edgerton. If we were in Scotland, I'd say hello, laddie. I'm George Gordon, and I served this church for 43 years. Through the Gilded Age, through World War I, and then the mad speculation of the 1920s. Our city was growing here by leaps and bounds. It seems that new societies for the betterment of society and humankind were springing up everywhere. Irish immigrants and their descendants were challenging the ways of the city founders, asserting themselves in business, especially in politics, And I myself, as you know, I'm an immigrant, having left my home in Scotland when I was but a lad of 18 years old. My views reflected the optimism of the age. I rejected the damnable Calvinistic scheme that the ideas that humankind were predestined for heaven or for hell. Instead, I preached the love of God for all of creation. And through my books, sermons, and other writings, my hope-filled theology changed the character of New England Congregationalism. And like so many of our UCC ministers today, I believe that God was still speaking and that our faith would flourish if we were not bound by those old creeds.
Now, just you wait a minute, Gordon. I like to think of myself as a forward-thinking fellow. I embraced the changes I saw that this church embraced as time moved forward. I accepted this sinfully opulent building and sanctuary, that blasted organ. I was okay when Reverend Crawford changed our sacred hymnal. I even welcomed your first woman senior minister. But your theology, Gordon, blasphemy, scandalous. I'm surprised the devil did not have his way with him.
At the beginning of my ministry, many agreed with you, Reverend Thatcher. They are dead now. However, I was clearly doing something right in my sermon, and it drew standing-only crowds on Sunday morning.
Gentlemen, you agreed to come here not to argue. Please stop.
Heaven is interesting, John Laddie. As you just heard from Reverend Thatcher, my theology was not always easily accepted by the congregation. Do you know that I sat for 3 hours of questioning by a council of local pastors and members of this church before I could be formally installed as minister here? I had reached my limit when a council member asked me if I were willing to be damned for the glory of God. I replied that I had no such intention. But if it be for the glory of God that this council be damned, I would not raise any objection. Reverend Edgerton, psst. I hope that you won't hesitate to let your congregation know when they have tested your patience.
Good afternoon, Reverend Edgerton. My name is Russell Henry Stafford. My friends called me Tom. I was the 17th senior minister of the Old South Church in Boston, serving during the later years of the Roaring Twenties through the Depression and World War II. You and I, John, are the only senior ministers Old South Church called from the Midwest. John, call me Tom. On my arrival, I found a church where a homiletic soloist preached to old families with old ideas in an old set of buildings consisting of a fading sanctuary, a wood chapel, and a parsonage. I led in the construction of this building with chapel, offices, schoolrooms, Mary Norton Hall, and guild rooms to be a center for fellowship, education, and service, not just on Sundays, but throughout the week. I also led in instituting new bylaws and an all-member stewardship campaign to make the church responsible to its current congregation, rather than to the descendants of former worshipers. The congregation just did not care about Sunday morning music. I advocated for great music at worship, predicting that the congregation would come to demand it. I insisted on abolishing the private ownership of church pews. Everyone was welcome to sit anywhere. For the first time, I recruited women to staff positions, leading church programs. Not everyone approved of these changes. One deacon assisted me in robing every Sunday and repeated the nastiest criticisms he had heard about me all week. It left me boiling mad, but I think it added a little zip to my sermons. Perhaps the most widespread criticism was that during World War II, I refused to preach about the war because no one heard about anything else anywhere else. As best I could, I preached the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is the very antithesis to war. John, I've had the privilege of listening to your sermons from heaven. My advice to you is to continue to preach that gospel of Jesus Christ as you have done so well. This is a church. That is what the people who come here come to hear. John, it is my privilege, on behalf of us all, to welcome you to this 354-year-old congregation as its 21st senior minister. Please know that we will all be smiling down on you and wishing you Godspeed as you and Old South begin this journey together. For behold, you are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. John Edgerton, God bless you, and God bless your ministry.
Reverend Edgerton, we invite you to share your thoughts with us.
I always felt that John Kelvin gets a bad rap for the I always thought that behind all the way behind all of the trappings of the notion and the doctrine of predestination stands the same basic truth that Martin Luther was declaring in saying that salvation is by grace and faith, which is to say that you don't have to worry about it. What you do with your life ought not be about trying to chase after salvation. That is a dead end, either because you have already earned it or because you are predestined to have it or not. But either way, that is not your problem, not something that you have to deal with, not a question for you to be concerned about. Instead, our lives can be lived in joy and service and in courage, because all of that has already been fixed up for us, either by the grace of God or by the predestination of God. Either way serves the same basic function. So I would say that to both of our Calvinist and more slightly less Calvinist sets of pastors, that that all of that is served to the good. So thank you, Tom, also for a note. I did not realize that you were also from the Midwest. That's a new one. That's a new one for me. And I've got to say, that is we had some quite lengthy tenures here from some of our pastors, which is not going to be 43 is not going to be. It's not in the cards. Not in the cards for me. So you'll certainly have me bested on that. And Jacob, sorry about your malaria and untimely death. That's, to have an untimely death in the service of the gospel, that's a tough one. But so thank you. We are appreciative of all that you did. So thank you for this really fun and wonderful presentation. Where's Catherine? Catherine, thank you for this and for gathering us for the Mary Norton Society Luncheon. This is great. This is one of the things that the Mary Norton Society is something which Nancy Taylor instituted and started, recognizing the need for a planned giving society inside of Old South Church. This is one of the most important kind of best practices of churches, to be able to have this kind of this society going. So we are grateful for the work of all the generations of the church. I'm well aware at times. At times a little freaked out by, at other times very encouraged by, the legacy of each of the senior pastors. If you have 354 years and only 20 people who were there prior, you got at least 1/20th of all of the awesome things in the history of the congregation occurring in those tenures. And so I look upon that at times, and I'm a little bit freaked out by what a big hill that is to climb. And then I remember that all of my colleagues were not doing this on our own, even if they were homiletical soloists. They were not ecclesial soloists, and that the work of the church in all of our generations has always been the work shared between the ministers of the church, all of the ministers of the church, and the members of the church, where we certainly do have a lot of fun here in the church. We are, even with our very straight-laced and buttoned-up forebears, that I'm grateful that even back in the 17th century, we were having a lot of fun. We're supposed to have a lot of fun. This is supposed to be fun. This is supposed to be a joy. We should be, we shouldn't be a dour lot, and we aren't. So I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you. Hey, it sounds like there's no other further program. So thank you for everybody. I'm going to stop creating feedback. Thank you to everybody for coming. We have a lot of, I think that Ralph has said that we have a lot of mac and cheese left. If you want to take some leftover mac and cheese, I certainly will be. I'll be taking a plate home. So help us with grabbing mac and cheese. Thank you for, if you can, also sort of move your chairs to the side. That's going to be helpful. Don't try and stack them on the stacks. It's trickier than it looks, and if it's not quite stacked right, then it's actually harder. So if you could just fold them up and lean them against the tables, that would be great. That would be very helpful. So thank you, everybody.